People think my life fell apart the day I left Barcelona. They're wrong. It happened long before anyone noticed. Long before the headlines, the court dates, the photographers waiting outside my house at dawn. It happened in the silence between words that were never said, in the empty chairs at dinner tables, in the mornings I woke up and realized I'd been holding my breath for months. By the time the world knew, I had already been drowning. But here's what they don't tell you about falling apart. You don't collapse all at once. You crumble in pieces so small that even you don't notice at first. A laugh that doesn't reach your eyes, a song you can't finish writing, a mirror you avoid because the woman staring back feels like a stranger. I left Barcelona not because I was broken, but because I was trying to remember how to breathe. Miami became my refuge, not because it was perfect, but because it was far. Far from the life I thought I'd built. Far from the man I thought I knew. Far from the version of myself I'd been performing for so long I forgot it wasn't real. The heat here is different. It clings to your skin, heavy and unforgiving, but honest. The city moves fast, too fast to dwell, too loud to overthink. I needed that. I needed to be somewhere that didn't ask me to explain myself every 5 minutes, somewhere I could just exist. I rented a house in Brickell, overlooking the bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows, white walls, minimalist and cold, the opposite of everything I'd ever chosen before, but it felt right, like starting over required erasing everything familiar. My sons adjusted faster than I did. Kids have that gift. They find joy in the smallest things. A new school, a new park, the beach on weekends. They didn't ask me if I was okay. Maybe they were afraid of the answer. Or maybe they knew I wasn't ready to give one. I threw myself into work. Studio sessions that stretched past midnight, collaborations with artists I'd never worked with before. Anything to keep my hands moving, my mind occupied. Because the moment I stopped, the silence crept in. And in that silence lived all the questions I wasn't ready to face. Did I see it coming? Could I have done something different? Was I ever really loved or just useful? The world had opinions, of course. They always do. Some pitied me, others blamed me. A few celebrated my freedom like it was something I'd chosen, not something that had been ripped away from me. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that freedom, when it's forced on you, feels a lot like exile. I was trying to rebuild myself. Slowly. Quietly. One day at a time. And then in the middle of that fragile reconstruction, Lewis Hamilton crossed my path. Not as a rumor, not as a headline, not as the next chapter the tabloids were desperate to write, but as someone who looked at me without the weight of the world expectations pressing down on my shoulders. It was after one of my shows at FTX Arena, a venue that would later carry its own scars. But that night, it was alive, electric, pulsing with thousands of voices singing my lyrics back to me. For 2 hours on that stage, I wasn't the woman the world pitied or dissected. I was just myself. The version of me that still knew how to fight, how to feel, how to connect. Backstage, the adrenaline was still buzzing through my veins when someone from my team mentioned he was there. Lewis Hamilton. In Miami for the Grand Prix weekend. He'd come to the show. I'll admit, I wasn't sure what to expect. Athletes at concerts are usually there for the spectacle, the photo op, the story they can tell later. I didn't think much of it. But then I saw him. He was standing off to the side, away from the chaos of the after-party setup, hands in his pockets, observing everything with this quiet intensity. When our eyes met, he didn't smile the way people usually do when they meet me. Eager, performative, ready to say all the right things. He just nodded. Like he saw me. Not Shakira the performer, not the tabloid story. Just me. That was incredible, he said when I walked over, and his voice was calm, genuine.
The way you connect with people, it's rare. I thanked him, expecting the conversation to end there, but it didn't. We talked for 20 minutes that felt like 2, about Miami, about starting over, about how strange it is to be known by millions and still feel invisible. He didn't ask about Barcelona. He didn't bring up the headlines. He didn't treat me like I was fragile or damaged or something to be handled carefully. He spoke to me like I was whole. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I could be.
The thing about Miami is that everyone's here for a reason. Some are running from something. Others are chasing a dream. A few are just passing through, caught between where they've been and where they're going. I was all three at once. After that first conversation backstage, I didn't expect to see Lewis again. Our worlds overlapped in theory, fame, pressure, constant scrutiny. But in practice, we moved through entirely different orbits. He was racing, I was recording. He was in Monaco half the year. I was here, trying to plant roots in a city that felt temporary. But Miami has a way of pulling people back. 2 weeks after my show, I was at a small cafe in Coconut Grove, hiding behind oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap, trying to enjoy an hour of anonymity. My security was outside, giving me just enough space to pretend I was a normal person, ordering a cortadito and a pastelito de guayaba. Mind if I sit? I looked up. Lewis. Same calm presence, same quiet smile. He was dressed down, black hoodie, jeans, sneakers, but somehow still carried himself like he belonged wherever he chose to be. "You're stalking me now," I teased, gesturing to the empty chair. "Would you believe coincidence?" He sat, setting down his own coffee, black, no sugar. "In Miami? Never." He laughed, and it was such an easy, unguarded sound that I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in months. We talked for over an hour, about nothing important and everything that mattered, about how hard it is to trust people when your life is public property, about how isolating success can be when everyone wants a piece of you, but no one wants to see you tired or sad or human. "You ever feel like you're performing even when you're alone?" I asked at one point. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Every day." It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't self-pity. It was just truth. The kind you don't say out loud often because it sounds ungrateful. But he understood, and I understood. And in that tiny cafe in Coconut Grove, surrounded by tourists and locals who had no idea who we weren't celebrities. We were just two people who were tired. That's how it started. Not with grand gestures or romantic declarations, not with paparazzi-ready boat rides or headline-making dinners. It started with coffee, with honesty, with the quiet relief of being seen by someone who didn't need anything from you. We started meeting more regularly, always low-key, always private, sometimes at my house, where we'd sit on the terrace overlooking the bay, the Miami skyline glittering in the distance. Other times at his place in South Beach, where Roscoe, his bulldog, would curl up at my feet while we talked until the early hours. He told me about the loneliness of being at the top, about the pressure to be perfect, to never show weakness, to always be on, about the way people saw him as a symbol, an icon, a brand, but rarely as a man who just wanted to feel connected to something real. I told him about Barcelona. Not the tabloid version, the real one. About the mornings I'd wake up next to someone and feel more alone than if I'd been by myself. About the years I spent trying to fix something that was already broken. About the guilt I carried for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting my kids from the fallout, for somehow failing at something I thought I'd built my entire life around. "You didn't fail," he said one night, his voice firm. "You survived." I wanted to believe him. The rumors started around the same time.
Photos of us leaving the same restaurant, spotted at the marina, seen together at a race in Miami Gardens. The tabloids ran wild. Shakira's new romance. Lewis Hamilton and Shakira, the truth. Is she moving on? It was exhausting and infuriating because they weren't wrong, but they weren't right either. What we had wasn't a headline. It wasn't a rebound or a publicity stunt or a desperate attempt to prove I was fine. It was quiet. It was honest. It was two people learning how to be gentle with each other in a world that demands you be steel. But the noise grew louder. One afternoon, my publicist called. "We need to address this. The speculation is out of control." "Address what?" I asked, exhausted. "We're friends." "Shakira, they have photos of you on his boat, of him at your house. This isn't going away." "Then let them talk." She sighed. "It's not just about you. It's about him too. His brand, his image, and yours. You're still in the middle of legal battles. This could complicate things." I hung up feeling sick. Because she was right. Everything was complicated. My divorce wasn't finalized, the custody arrangements were still being negotiated, and now every photo, every sighting, every moment of peace I tried to carve out for myself was being weaponized. Lewis noticed the shift in me. Of course he did. "You're pulling away," he said one evening, as we sat on my terrace watching the sun set over Biscayne Bay. "He's good at this, always seeing things others don't." "I'm not," I lied. "Shakira." His voice was soft, but it cut through every defense I'd been building. "I don't want to drag you into this," I admitted. "My life is a mess right now. You have your career, your legacy, everything you've worked for. I don't want to be the reason people start questioning you or tearing you apart." He reached over and took my hand. His touch was warm, steady. "I'm not afraid of noise," he said. "I've been dealing with it my entire life. What I'm afraid of is losing something real because we let other people decide what we're allowed to have." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But belief is a luxury when the world is watching. There's a difference between being known and being understood. I'd been known my entire adult life, my face on magazine covers, my songs played in grocery stores, at weddings, in cars stuck in traffic. Millions of people could recite my lyrics, mimic my dance moves, recognize my voice in the first 3 seconds of a song. But understood? That was rare. That required someone willing to sit in the mess with you, not to fix it, not to judge it, but just to be there while you figured it out. Lewis was that person. The media painted us as a romance, a rebound, the next chapter in my journey of healing. But what we actually were was quieter, deeper, harder to categorize. We were two people who'd spent so long being symbols of success, of resilience, of excellence, that we'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be human. He invited me to Silverstone. Not to the race itself, though that was part of it, but to his world, to see what his life actually looked like when the cameras captured only fragments of the truth. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because I knew what it would mean. The speculation would explode, the headlines would write themselves. Shakira joins Lewis Hamilton at British Grand Prix. Are they official? "I don't want to make things harder for you," I told him over the phone one night, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're not," he said simply. "Come, not because of what people will think. Come because I want you there." So I went. Silverstone in July is chaos wrapped in tradition. The roar of engines, the smell of burning rubber, the electric energy of over 100,000 fans packed into grandstands, all of them living and dying with every turn, every overtake, every split-second decision. I stayed in the Mercedes garage, tucked behind tinted glass, watching Lewis prepare. He was in his element here, focused,
precise, completely present. But between sessions, he'd find me. A quick glance, a small smile, a moment of connection in the middle of the storm. "You good?" he asked during a break, still in his race suit, sweat dampening his hair. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. For the first time in months, I wasn't performing. I wasn't pretending. I was just there, watching someone I cared about do what he loved. And he was doing the same for me, not treating me like a fragile thing that needed protecting, but like someone strong enough to stand beside him. The race was brutal. Mechanical issues, strategy calls that didn't pan out, a fifth-place finish that felt like a loss, even though most people would kill for it. I saw the frustration in his eyes afterward, the way he carried the weight of expectation like armor that never came off. Back at the hotel that night, away from the noise, he was quiet. "You don't have to be okay all the time," I said softly. He looked at me, surprised. "I know you think you do. I know the world expects you to be this unstoppable force, this perfect example of excellence and grace under pressure. But you're allowed to be disappointed. You're allowed to be human." His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he'd brush it off, the way we all learn to do: deflect, minimize, move on. But then he exhaled, long and slow, and the armor cracked. "I'm tired," he admitted. "Not of racing, but of everything that comes with it. The politics, the narratives, the way every decision I make gets dissected and judged and turned into a referendum on who I am as a person." "I know," I said, "because I did." "And now you're getting pulled into it," he continued, his voice rough. "People analyzing every photo, every interaction, trying to decide if you're good for me or if I'm using you, or if we're both just desperate and broken." "Let them talk," I said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "But what if they're right?" he asked quietly. "What if I'm putting you through this for something that can't work? What if I'm just selfish?" I moved closer, taking his hands in mine. "You're not selfish," I said firmly. "You're human, and so am I. And maybe that's all this needs to be. Two people who see each other clearly and choose to show up anyway." He pulled me into his arms then, and we stood there in the silence of that hotel room, holding each other like we were the only solid thing in a world that wouldn't stop spinning. But the noise didn't stop. The criticism came from every direction. Some said I was a distraction, that I was derailing his focus during a crucial season. Others said he was taking advantage of my vulnerability, positioning himself as the hero in my story. A few claimed we were both frauds, manufacturing a relationship for publicity. My phone buzzed constantly. My team wanted statements. My lawyers warned me about optics. My mother called, worried, asking if I knew what I was doing. "Are you?" she asked gently. "I don't know, Mama," I admitted. "But I know how I feel when I'm with him, and that has to count for something." "It does. But be careful, mi amor. The world is not kind to women who choose happiness on their own terms." She was right, of course. She always was. The backlash intensified. Opinion pieces dissecting my choices. Social media threads debating whether I was moving on too fast. Strangers who'd never met me claiming to know what was best for my life, my children, my heart. And through it all, Lewis stood firm. He didn't issue statements. He didn't engage with the noise. He just kept showing up for me, for us, for whatever this fragile thing was that we were trying to build. But I could see it wearing on him, the tension in his shoulders, the way he'd check his phone and his expression would tighten, the questions from journalists that skirted the line between professional curiosity and invasive speculation. "They're asking about you in press conferences now," he told me one night, his voice strained. "What are they saying?" "That my personal life is personal. But they don't care. They just keep pushing." I felt the guilt rise in my chest, sharp and familiar. Maybe we should... Don't, he interrupted. Don't say it. Louis, I know what you're thinking, that you're making things harder for me, that I'd be better off without the complication, but you're wrong. Am I? I asked, my voice breaking, because it feels like I'm drowning and now I'm pulling you under with me. He cupped my face in his hands, forcing me to meet his eyes. Enjoying the story? Hit the like button, subscribe, drop your comment, and turn on the notifications. Let's keep going. We stepped back, not because we wanted to, but because the weight became too much for both of us. It wasn't a dramatic breakup or a mutual decision announced to the world. It was quieter than that, a gradual pulling away. Fewer calls, longer silences, responses that took hours instead of minutes. The kind of slow fade that happens when two people care about each other too much to keep hurting each other. He had a championship to fight for, races across 3 continents, sponsors, team obligations, a legacy he'd spent 2 decades building. I had court dates, custody negotiations, 2 boys who needed their mother present, not distracted, an album to finish, a life to rebuild from scratch. And somewhere in the middle of all that, there was us, this fragile, beautiful thing we'd found in the chaos. But fragile things don't survive in hurricanes. I don't want to lose you, he said one night over FaceTime, his face pixelated and tired on my screen. He was in Singapore. I was in Miami. The 12-hour time difference felt symbolic. You're not losing me, I said softly. We're just pausing. For how long? I don't know. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we couldn't say. I miss you. This hurts. I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough. I'm sorry, I whispered finally. Don't be, he said, his voice rough. This isn't your fault. It's just life. But it didn't feel like life. It felt like punishment, like the universe had dangled something real in front of us, let us taste it, and then snatched it away the moment we reached for it. The weeks after were some of the hardest I'd experienced, not because I was alone, I'd been alone before, but because I knew what I was missing. I knew what it felt like to have someone who saw me, who understood me, who made me feel like I didn't have to be strong every second of every day. I threw myself into work again, studio sessions, rehearsals, writing lyrics that I'd never release because they were too raw, too real, too close to the truth I wasn't ready to share. My boys noticed. Of course they did. ¿Estás bien, mamá? My youngest asked one morning, his small hand on my arm. Sí, mi amor, estoy bien. But I wasn't, and pretending was exhausting. I saw Louis on screen, racing in Austin and Mexico City and Brazil. I watched him win in Sao Paulo, his face triumphant but distant, and I wondered if he was thinking about me, if he missed me the way I missed him, if this was as hard for him as it was for me. I wanted to text him, to call, to fly to wherever he was and tell him I'd made a mistake, that we should fight for this, that love was worth the noise. But I didn't, because I knew it wasn't that simple. Then, in late November, my phone rang. His name on the screen. My heart stopped. Hey, I answered, trying to sound casual. Hey, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. You busy? Not really. Why? I'm in Miami. I sat up straight. You are? Yeah. Thought maybe we could talk. In person. We met at the same cafe in Coconut Grove where we'd sat all those months ago. Full circle. He looked different, lighter somehow, like he'd set something down. How are you? I asked, and the question felt both too small and too big. Better, he said, honestly. Season's done. I've had time to think, to breathe. And? And I miss you, he said simply. Not the version of you the world sees, not the idea of you. You, the woman who called me out when I needed it, who made me laugh, who understood what it's like to carry weight no one else can see. My chest tightened. I miss you too. So what do we do about it? I don't know, I admitted. Nothing's changed. The noise is still there. The pressure, the expectations. I still have my life, you still have yours. But what if we stop trying to make it fit into what everyone else thinks it should be? He said, leaning forward. What if we just existed? No labels, no timelines, no promises we can't keep. Just us, on our own terms. Is that even possible? I don't know, but I think it's worth trying. I looked at him, this man who'd seen me at my lowest and never flinched, who shown me his own cracks and trusted me not to break him further, who walked away not because he wanted to, but because he thought it was best for me. Okay, I said softly. Yeah? Yeah. His smile was quiet, relieved, real. We didn't go public. We didn't post photos or make announcements or give the world the narrative they wanted. We just were. Quietly, privately, on our own terms. He'd visit Miami when he could. I'd meet him in London when my schedule allowed. We'd text at odd hours, send voice notes, FaceTime when the time zones aligned. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was ours. And slowly, the noise faded. Not because people stopped talking, but because we stopped listening. I learned that happiness doesn't require validation, that love doesn't need to be performed to be real, that two people can find peace in chaos if they choose each other every day, even when, especially when, it's hard. The world saw gossip. We lived truth. And that truth was this. We were two people healing through each other, finding calm in the storm, building something small and sacred in the spaces between the noise. It wasn't the story they wanted, but it was the one we needed. I've spent most of my life telling stories. In my music, in my performances, in the carefully crafted image I've presented to the world for over 2 decades. Some of those stories were true, others were aspirational, the version of myself I wanted to become. And a few were protective, shields I built to hide the parts of me that felt too vulnerable to expose. But this story, the one about Louis and me, this one I kept for myself. Not because I was ashamed, not because it was scandalous or secret or something that needed hiding, but because it was mine, ours. And in a life where everything is public, where every moment is documented and dissected and turned into content, having something that belongs only to you is revolutionary. People still ask me about it. In interviews, when journalists think they're being subtle, on social media, where strangers feel entitled to answers, even friends, well-meaning but curious, probing gently for confirmation or denial. I don't give them what they want, not because I'm being coy, but because the truth is more nuanced than a yes or no, more complicated than together or not together, more real than any headline could capture. What I learned from Louis, what we learned from each other, is that healing isn't linear, that you can care deeply about someone and still need space, that love doesn't always look the way we're told it should, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose peace over performance, even when the world demands a show. He taught me that it's okay to not have all the answers, that vulnerability isn't weakness, that being seen, truly seen by someone who doesn't need anything from you is one of the most profound gifts you can receive. And I hope I taught him something too, that rest is productive, that softness is strength, that he doesn't have to carry everything alone. We still talk, not every day, but often enough. We check in, We support each other from whatever distance life requires. And when our paths cross, which they do occasionally, in cities that feel less like destinations and more like meeting points, we fall back into that easy rhythm we found in Miami all those months ago. It's not a fairy tale. There's no dramatic reconciliation scene, no public declaration, no ring or timeline or plan, but it's real. And in a world that often mistakes performance for truth, real is rare. I think about the woman I was when I first arrived in Miami, broken, exhausted, convinced that trusting someone again would be a betrayal of the lessons I'd learned. And I think about the woman I am now, still healing, still learning, but no longer afraid of what comes next. Because here's what they don't tell you about falling apart. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you have to let everything crumble so you can rebuild it stronger, smarter, truer to who you actually are instead of who you thought you were supposed to be. And sometimes in the middle of that reconstruction, someone walks into your life at exactly the right moment. Not to save you. You were never drowning, you were learning to swim, but to remind you that you're not alone in the deep water, that there are others out there who understand what it's like to be strong and scared at the same time, who know that success and loneliness can coexist, who see you, not as a symbol or a story, but as a person. If I could tell my younger self anything, the girl who dreamed of stages and songs and love that lasted forever, I'd tell her this. Life will not go according to plan. You will trust the wrong people. You will build things that crumble. You will love with your whole heart and still end up alone. But you will also rise. You will rebuild. You will find moments of grace in the most unexpected places. And you will learn that happiness doesn't require permission from anyone but yourself. The world wanted a different version of the story. One with clean lines and easy answers. One that fit neatly into the narrative they'd already written for me. Tragic heartbreak followed by triumphant new love, preferably with photos and confirmation and a timeline they could dissect. But life isn't a script, and I'm done performing for people who don't actually see me. What Lewis and I had, what we have, is ours. It's messy and beautiful and complicated and real. It's late-night conversations about fear and failure. It's understanding that sometimes love means giving each other space. It's knowing that you can care deeply about someone without needing to own them or define them or turn them into a headline. It's choosing each other quietly, even when the world is screaming for something louder. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. That peace doesn't come from having all the answers or making everyone understand. It comes from knowing yourself well enough to trust your own truth, even when, especially when, it doesn't make sense to anyone else. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if Lewis and I will end up together in the way people expect, or if we'll remain this beautiful, undefined thing that exists outside traditional categories. I don't know if we'll look back on this chapter as a beginning or an interlude or simply a moment that mattered. What I do know is this. He came into my life when I needed to remember how to breathe. And I like to think I did the same for him. We found each other in the chaos and created calm. We saw each other clearly and chose to stay, even when it was hard. The world saw gossip. We lived truth. And in the end, that's the only version of the story that matters.
If you watched until here, thank you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your messages. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications so you never miss another story like this. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee. Any amount helps a lot. Link in the pinned comment.